Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. We're just going to give everyone a couple of minutes to log on because I see people are starting to come on board. And welcome to the ongoing webinar series from RTS on today's topic on taming the tech stack. So we'll start this in a couple of minutes. So for those of you who just joined that, we're just going to give it one more minute to let more people log on, and we'll be able to start the webinar shortly. Well, for those of you in the East Coast, good afternoon. For those of you in the Midwest or the West Coast, good morning. We're going to go ahead and get started here as people are continuing to log on. And so I'd like to welcome you to the ongoing RTS series. Today's topic is going to be taming the tech stack. And let me first start by introducing our panel. And so, David, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hello, this is David Cantu. I am the co-founder and chief customer officer for Hot Schedules, and prior to that, a restaurateur of 17 years. Pleasure to be here, Fred.
Great, thank you. And Alex. Oh, we must have Alex on mute. Well, Alex will be joining. There you are.
Hey, Fred. Thanks for the introduction. I am Alex Birnbaum. I recently got a title upgrade to Technology Maven, so thank you, Fred, for that. And I've been in the restaurant industry for about 20 years and doing technology the whole time, operations as well, and happy to be here with you today.
Great. So let's get right into it. So, David, walk us through the circumstance we're in right now.
Well, technology is changing at a pace that seems impossible for many of us to keep up with. And, I would say that it's created significant pressures between consumer demands and operations to meet those demands. We've seen a heightened focus on, technology stacks for the front of the house and the emergence of that technology. And there has been less focus on back of the house, which has created an environment of complacency. You need to do something with both front of the house and back of the house, but investments are being made mostly in consumer experiences. With that, we know how this has become a challenge, and, how does one go about achieving this? How do you consistently keep up with the change? That's what we'll be talking about today.
Yeah, and of course, the restaurant industry is the only one that's been affected by these things. So, Alex, give us a view of what's happened throughout the last 30 years in terms of digital disruption.
Yeah, Fred, as you said, this disruption's not new. I mean, it's been going on forever, but 30 years, digital disruption has really accelerated at a rapid pace. If you look back in the 90s, the music industry was heavily disrupted with the advent of iTunes and MP3 and the removing of the friction of purchasing. The traditional video rental business, Blockbuster, is a great example. Netflix came along, and all of a sudden, it's very easy to, watch and download movies. And then finally, our industry is ripe for disruption right now between food trucks, food halls, third-party delivery companies. The digital disruption and the ease of operating different concepts has really changed the landscape and will continue to threaten the traditional systems that were out there today.
Yeah, and a lot of things continue to affect us. So I'm going to give you a brief list now of the things that are affecting the industry when it comes to technology. And we've highlighted some of the ones that we're going to talk about in a moment more specifically because they're the ones that are sort of beginning to really gain momentum. When you look at how the industry has been affected, go back to early technology, POS systems, or even pagers, which was a big deal. And then as it's evolved, even more so. By the year 2030, 800 million jobs will be replaced by automation and robotics. And out of the top 15 jobs, 4 of them in the restaurant business. So we're seeing that with kiosks, we're seeing that with robots in the kitchen. So David, why don't you highlight some of the other things that you're noticing happening with the trends that are affecting our industry?
You know, the biggest challenge the industry is facing is labor. Higher wages due to intense competition for workers is driving up the cost of labor. You know, we've seen a lot of investments over the past 10 years as we've seen the rapid growth since the post, recession. A lot of billions of dollars have been invested into restaurants, so there's a level of saturation which has created a really tight labor market. It's the tightest labor market since the late 1990s, which increases, wage pressures. Many of these restaurants are having to compete for top talents by providing higher wages, but we're also seeing the rise of minimum wage in over 20 states this past year. And we expected to see it grow 50 to 75%, specific to California and various cities over the course of the next 5 years. Now, with that, on the technology side, many of these restaurateurs are faced with, automating or providing, even robotics, into the, to replace some of the workforce, knowing the expense is so great. We're seeing the emergence of kiosks, not only in quick serve, but also in full serve. With respect to quick serve, at the restaurant show in Chicago in 2017, there were about 12 companies that were selling, kiosks. This past year, there were 36. A heightened focus on that. We've also seen kiosks paying at the table with a lot of the mass casual brands that are, because they are having a tough time, to employ. It allows them to provide, obviously less wait staff on the floor, and allows that wait staff to make more money by having some automation and allowing them to manage more tables. Mobile apps for ordering in QSR and fast casual instead of going through drive-through, and then back of the house technology that enables and empowers teams through actionable insights as well. But this adds to the complexity and it doesn't simplify it, and that's where we see an API and platform as a service becoming a trend for IT innovators. The 2.5% that are willing to be innovative, and we saw brands like Domino's. They were first to market with customer-facing mobile ordering, and since that time, they've seen a 3,000% increase in shares. And we've seen a lot of restaurants clamoring to have that level of focus 10 years later.
Yeah, so all this stuff is very confusing. So what we try to do is put together a landscape to help those of you who are non-technical to just get your arms around what's really happening in this space. So let me define it for you. So front of the house operation are some of the things that David just mentioned: kiosks, digital menus, some mobile payment things that are happening in the front of the house. Back of the house is where the granddaddy of them all is. POS has been around since the 50s and 60s, and even companies like Hot Schedules who really solved that problem of labor scheduling. And then it goes beyond that now in terms of your accounting system, BI tools, all the stuff that you'll see that really help the operations of your business. From there, you go into the things that generate revenue and engage your guests. And this is the one that's the newest. This is the one that's getting all the buzz. This is the one that gets a lot of attention because it's all kind of sexy things. Social media and mobile, the new marketing device that is now no longer in the future, is here now. For the first time ever, digital ad spending has superseded and exceeded traditional broadcast media. That's a big, big amount of money we're talking about. It's a big change. And of course, those of you who have done email for a long time, and then loyalties and an app and so forth and so on, this is the big one that we're going to be talking about a little bit later on. And then lastly, the analytics, the way to capture all the data that's generated from all these various systems. Data analytics will be the new wave. And I predict that in the next 3 to 5 years, all major restaurant companies will have some form of data scientist, either internally or through a third party, to help them really understand their guests. A great example is Cava Grill. Cava Grill has a data scientist. They're a small company, but they know a lot about their guests, their buying patterns, what the engagement needs to be. And as a result of that, they've been very, very effective. And I'm going to be curious to see how their purchase of Zoe's will allow them to apply that technology going forward. And just to give you a taste of how crazy it can be, I'm going to have David walk us through a couple of graphics.
So, this is pretty interesting. So this is the ecosystem today. If you rewind back to, prior to 2010, you would probably see about 25% of these particular companies that were focused on these various point systems. The outer circle is where we've seen the most emergence over the past 7 years. Most of these, are, after 2010 that they were started. But as you said, a lot of investments have been made there. Obviously with this tight labor market, with the overexpansion of restaurants, everybody's fighting to gain more business. As you look at the tech market map that was created by CB, and this isn't all of them. There are a lot more technologies out there. They're all interwoven into the restaurant. And I'd like to say interwoven. Actually, they are different point systems that require a lot of complexity. And again, we kind of think about that fragmentation and how that impacts operations, but also impacts IT. It becomes very difficult for IT to manage these various disparate systems.
Well, and we can see here through the study the spend. So go ahead, David, fill us in on what's been happening here.
Yeah, it's making it really expensive. I mean, definitely tech spend is on the rise. Many of these companies are trying to figure out a way to be more efficient, more competitive. And with that, there's been a heightened focus on that front of house software as well as CRM and loyalty. If you combine those two together, you'll see where that is really impacting a lot of the spend. But now there is a focus, and we're seeing it more and more on the back of house. A lot of companies have, prior to really 2010, have implemented back of the house systems that aren't really scalable. They aren't performing in the manner that is managing the growth of those businesses.
Well, and you're right, because now you have a situation where the marketing department's got a bigger budget than the IT department because of the rise in digital branding. As we see here, 58%, planned increase. And so it's costing a lot of money. And David, you've had a conversation with a restaurant CEO on the East Coast.
Yeah, this was off of the East Coast, and it was actually to my surprise, in discussing that, this particular company has, invested wholeheartedly in technology over the past 7 years, and it just surpassed their lease budget. Number one is still labor, the number one expense, followed by food, and now it's technology. And I think that's not unlike many of the brands are facing today.
Yeah, David, you remind me when I was in operations, which was long before you. I think our only real technology was the POS system. And that has changed. And so your experience came after mine, and managers now have to be wizards in this stuff.
Yeah, we see on the limited service restaurants, this is quick serve and fast casual, they're running anywhere between 8 and 20 technology systems between back of the house and front of the house. And for full serve, it's anywhere between 25 and in some cases, the highest I've heard is 42. I won't name the brands because they might be embarrassed that they've actually, they get excited about the thought of being innovative, but at the same time, they realize how complex they made it for the operator. If you look based on the tight labor market today, the restaurant management turnover for full service is around 36%. This is based on TDN2K's data. For the limited service, it's about a 60% turnover. So you imagine coming into an environment, learning how operations is managed, understanding the menu, understanding the customer, and then understanding anywhere between 8 and 15 different technologies, or if you're full serve, managing 20 to 20, it becomes pretty daunting. So that's what, we're seeing. And with that, it's really led our focus to that consolidation on everything focused on the back of house, not the front of house, but the back of house because of the disparate systems. And I would say that I've worked with several different executives that have literally laid out their tech stack and have shared, the disparate systems and what they're trying to achieve and drastically reducing that tech stack because the expense comes on hiring additional IT personnel to manage multiple vendors. In addition to that investment, they're having to manage multiple integration points, which is allowing them to be complacent on keeping older technology because the expense is on maintaining. HT Magazine put out a survey that 70% of all brands, 70% of the brands surveyed were spending this was all of the brands were spending 70% in maintaining current systems. Obviously, they were almost stuck on moving forward because of that, the various disparate systems that they were managing.
Wow. Well, and that's the challenge, right? So, by the way, David, thank you for sharing your childhood photo with us. That's really nice of you to do that. So the challenge we have, what do we do, right? That's the situation, that's the complexity. So let's go right into, tackling the tech stack. Let's get down to the meat of this thing so we really understand what's happening. So I'd like to have Alex talk a little bit about the idea of systems intelligence and the functions that exist in an organization.
So team, last month we did a webinar actually focused specifically on systems intelligence. So that one is recorded and we can get that information over to you. But really, the interconnectedness of the systems is the key here. The systems include not just the technology, but also the people who use it every day. It includes all the stakeholders, the team members, the vendors, your guests, and as well as understanding the systems themselves. And when you look at this, it's really interesting to see how they all affect each other and lead to that systems intelligent quotient for the entire company. David, from your perspective, how do you see these interconnecting and becoming more interconnected?
When we think about the day in the life of a manager, we're really focused on when they walk into the business for the day. Whether they're opening or whether they're the closing manager, there is a workflow. There's a process and there's certain steps that they take to go review. Whether it's determining on whether or not who's on staff. They need to know when to forecast. They need to know when to schedule. They need to know when to order food, liquor, beer, and wine. Obviously, when to review applicants, when to hire and onboard, and when to make payments, when to make payroll. If you think about the day in the life of a manager, the specific day and time, and you have a clear roadmap of what they need to do, it provides clear objectives. You provide clear objectives for them. It gives them the area of focus to where when the time comes between 11 and 1:30 or between 5:30 and 9 o'clock, they are on the floor focused on creating the right guest experiences. So we think about all of those disparate systems. And when we built out our new technology platform, which we unveiled last year, Clarify, we built out a workflow that interconnected not only the current systems that they use from us, but building in third-party applications into that workflow. So they knew exactly what they needed to do at a specific certain time and where to go. In addition to that, the data was an important aspect on ensuring how they were measured. Every one of us wants to know how we're measured, and we want to know whether or not we're doing good or bad. I always said that running restaurants was a thankless job. We really didn't know if we were doing good or bad because we weren't necessarily seeing any benchmark, if I was improving or declining in specific areas. Food, labor, might be turnover, guest experiences. So we think about those important KPIs that are specific to a manager that allows them to understand if they're trending up or down. And it will allow them to have the self-gratification that they may not get from their boss to know that they're doing better or that they beat, the budget or that they were improving sales. So we built out the dashboard that pulls the pertinent information, whether that's from the point of sale, whether that's from our current systems around food, labor, learning management, prep, production, or third-party systems that might bring CRM and loyalty, and provide clear objectives and clear KPIs so they can run the day-to-day and know whether or not they're doing good or bad.
Well, that's great. So what we've seen is you've taken it sort of from a big universal view down to the store level where you can really help a manager's workflow and to manage their day. So this is a different view of taking that systems intelligence. And if you look at the long line that says infrastructure, below that, those four departments are the ones that cover every single department in the organization: human resources, technology, finance, administration. they affect everything and support everybody else. The other departments like operations, development, the food and beverage, culinary, branding and marketing, they're above that and they sort of function in a silo. Not that they don't have cross-functionalization, but this is what you're trying to do. So technology is trying to, sort of put it all together and make some sense. So, Alex, as as we look at this, and you're a former CTO, how do you really now manage the process of building your tech stack?
Yeah, the process really starts with conversations and documentation. We need to map it out. So this is the way that we group technologies together when we start to look at an organization and what they have going on. Now, this is an example. As you see in this one, there's drive-through. So this is more of a quick service model. But this can be adapted, and we've used a similar kind of segmentation for many different segments of the restaurant business. But we start out by looking at ways to group it. So we're looking at corporate infrastructure, and when we look at it, you'll see the colors on this slide reflect blue is foundational, green is basically the essential pieces, and red is the differentiation. And what we're looking at here is how we think about systems. Foundational things are items that every single company needs. You need it to just operate. You need to have an ERP. You need payroll systems to get people paid. You need a point of sale to ring up your orders. You need a time clock to clock in and out. This is just stuff that everybody has to have at the point of price of entry.
Alex, to get some clarity, we're looking at a sample here of more of a drive-through QSR model. But as it gets more complex, as David pointed out, where you've got all these different functions for a casual dining restaurant or even fine dining, this model can then be enlarged to include and capture all the other things that are going on. Is that what you're showing here?
Yeah, exactly. This model is changes for full service. It changes for brands that have a differentiating factor, gaming. This could include many different pieces, and we have to evaluate it as essential for foundational for the hospitality industry, essential for the segment that they're in, and then differentiating, something that differentiates them from their competition. And those differentiators could be as simple as the way they accept payments is less, is easier to handle. It could be something as simple as their performance management system allows them to understand and staff a large amount of restaurants very quickly.
That's correct. Let's stop that a little bit. And see how you can map that workflow.
Very good. So once we understand the kind of global grouping, I'm sorry, Fred, you were going to say something?
Nope.
All right. Once we understand that global grouping, we look at the systems, and basically we want to have a high-level systems map to understand how these systems are interconnected. And so this is all part of understanding how your organization runs, how these different systems come together, and understand that if you change out one part of them, you're going to affect more than just that piece. So specifically on here, you'll see that this is a point of sale system that's end of life, or a back office system that's end of life. There are many different connections here. There are many different systems that they touch. You have guest-facing technology here, loyalty. You have marketing and analytics. You have BI, data warehousing, scheduling systems, payroll, labor, food cost management, back office and reporting. And so really understanding not just the systems themselves and where they fit in that tech stack, but also the connections between them is key to how you go through this. And then not just mapping the processes, the systems themselves, but also we need to get into how we map the processes. And what I want to show here is basically we have a host stand process here, or a greeting of a restaurant process, where it starts with a decision to visit, it moves through the arrival and the check-in process, and it ends basically when the server greets the guest at the table. And I point this out because even though this is a very simple process, 3 different people on the left-hand side, the server, the host or greeter, or the guest, there could be 3 to 4 systems, technology systems that person has already interacted with. They might have looked at a website before they come in. They might have made a reservation using a service that's out there. There might be a table management system that the host is using to determine where they're going to be seated or whether or not they need to be added to a wait list, paging systems, all the way through the POS system that the server is going to start a check with after they greet them. And understanding that changing out any one of those systems or any one of those pieces will affect not just the person who's using it, the server, but also perhaps the host that's working with them to bring them to that point, or the guests themselves. And so seeing the processes laid out, understanding what systems are in use during each phase of the process is important to understanding the easiest way to build those requirements for a system. It will also be very helpful on the rollout side to have this information as you understand the training that needs to be updated and the people who need to be re-educated on the changes that you're pushing through the system.
Yeah, well, Alice, as you've shared, obviously, if this is just to map out what we're currently doing, much less to actually get into the RFP process. And so I think it's important to understand that third parties can help you do that. We obviously do that at Results to Strategy. There are other companies that do that, because it's not just as simple as saying, gee, what can you do for me? You need to understand what your needs are. And in this RFP process, Alex basically just identified the first step, define what you're going on. So Alice, walk us through some of these other areas, and David, feel free to pipe in where you think you might have a unique perspective.
Yeah, please do. So the technology process, understanding the technology, the processes, the documentation is all important. Understanding, not just that piece, but also what the needs of the different people are that you're working with. When we do RFP processes, or if you should do your own RFP process, talking to not just the technology team and the operations team, but also understanding the needs of accounting and HR and payroll, understanding what the marketing team is planning and ensuring that you can deliver what's needed from a digital perspective is key. And making sure there's alignment within the organization on the front end is incredibly important.
Hey, Alex,
into the second stage was, yep.
Alex, we had a quick question. A couple of people wanted to know what KDS, ERP means, some of these acronyms that we find in here. Can you just very quickly explain what it is?
Yeah, I absolutely can. KDS is a kitchen display system. It's just an alternative to a printer for presenting orders to the kitchen and making sure that that those orders are processed. KDS systems also allow you to track time, depending on how they're implemented, time to cook, time it takes the people to bump them off the screen, so that you understand the difference between when it's ordered and when it's prepared. One of the other ones on here, ERP, is an enterprise reporting platform. Basically, that's your accounting package. That's the heart of the system. So enterprise reporting platform there. Did I leave any other acronyms on here?
No, that's fine. That'd be good.
And RFP, when we're talking about RFP here, it's request for proposal. And I say that only because it's a lot more than just a request for a proposal. David, I heard you were going to say something.
No. I mean, I certainly have things to add just from a vendor side on going through RFPs, just from my perspective and experience. But no, if you want to continue, then I'll share just from my side how this can be really great or really negative.
Thank you. All right, so I'll continue on. I'll continue on a little bit here. So, with once we have all of the pre-work done, the identifying it, the next thing we need to do is really understand how we're going to score this. And I think it's important to talk about this on the front end. Understanding what the requirements are, and then understanding that we're going to build a balanced scorecard with both quantitative and qualitative factors involved, so that we can move ahead and when we get to the scoring part, we understand already what we're looking for. Identifying the vendors who meet the criteria is key. And I'm not going to read these bullet points directly, but really the idea is that we're working with everyone to make sure that we're inviting only companies that can provide the services that are required, and that we are ensuring that they understand what the services that are required are. A 1,200 questionnaire is useful only in spending a lot of time checking boxes. Understanding how a vendor can help an organization is the key here, and that's what we want to get to.
Well, part of it is
once we actually
the level of complexity, right? So if you have a QSR versus a full service restaurant, the ability for some of the leadership in the company at the store level is an important consideration. Can they understand it, and what's going to give them the most value in making a decision in terms of how to run the best restaurant more effectively?
That's exactly right. Yeah, system selection processes that don't include that feedback and that information, just they don't work out as well. we really need to have all the stakeholders at the table and understanding what it is.
So, David, what were you going to share
Yep.
about the RFP process as a vendor? You go through these, so give us the inside scoop.
Okay, this is from years of being scarred by RFPs. So this is just from the perspective of a vendor. And the truth is I hate RFPs. And the reason why I hate RFPs is, and I learned this a long time ago through, I was fortunate to have been a part of a group called Vistage for 7 years, and we had a lot of, speakers that came in and educated us as business owners. And one of the things that always stuck with me, and this was a very well-known and respected executive that's focused on sales, his claim, and based on all of his experience, that 70% of the time, with the RFP, a vendor was already selected. A company just felt that they had to go through the process, just to ensure that they did all the diligence for whether it's their leadership team or their board, to make sure that they were choosing the right partner. So from my perspective, a lot of times it makes me wonder if we're cannon fodder, and how this is being managed. Is it done by the company itself, or is it done by a third party? If it's done by the company and we get to engage, it allows us to determine as a vendor whether or not this is really a culture fit. While I love to grow our business, I love to grow our business with the right partners. And that's essentially, specific to Hot Schedule is what we look for. We look for partnership. We're not just looking for business. And if we feel there's not a culture fit, aside from, whether or not we even fit the needs, we can determine that through an RFP. But the RFPs from a vendor side, there's some significant investment that we've seen. We've invested $25,000 to $50,000 on participating in an RFP and through that process. If it's a third-party vendor, there are a few out there that, in one particularly that I, about a year ago, called them and asked them to not include us in RFPs going forward. For probably about 7 years, we responded to every one of their RFPs. We weren't allowed to speak to the customer, determine whether or not we were a good fit, and we had never won business. Despite the fortunate of our success of growth, we invested a lot on those RFPs only to determine that we fell second place. But even in that RFP process, they don't necessarily align sometimes with the decision that's made. And we found that out the hard way, to where sometimes it was an executive relationship that a competitor had that ended up choosing, the relationship over whether or not the vendor was the right choice. The last point I want to make is nothing more discouraging than getting down to the final 2 or 3 and being asked to, beat the best price. So from a vendor out there, knowing whether or not, hey, we're just trying to pick the cheapest one out there, we would decline that all day long, because we're not going to be the cheapest. We're best in class for a reason. There's a level of service and support, on the front end of implementation as well as ongoing, that we expect from our team. And, if there's not alignment on that culture, it's something we would rather know up front, rather than being at the very end and pitted against another, partner out there. I'll get off my soapbox now.
No, well, David, thank you. Because we go through a lot of RFPs with companies that do sometimes pre-select, regardless of whether the system would actually fit appropriately for their concept. And we know it takes a lot of time and money to put these things together. And for those restaurateurs on the phone, this is like someone asks you to do a pre-selection meal for 15 people in the hopes of landing a party of 50, and they don't even give you feedback, the opportunity to talk to people. It's expensive. And we all manage that in the restaurant industry about price value, and I think the same thing applies to any kind of vendor. So I think you did a good job representing what goes on with the vendors. So Alex, we've gone through the selection process. And if you are using a third party to help you do this, they'll give you the reasons why they would select system 1, system 2, and it is a holistic system. But the next challenge is really implementation, and that's what I think is very difficult. So we have a graphic here that sort of shows you, and now that you know what ERP is. HRIS is Human Resource Information System. POS is point of sale. CRM is Customer Relation Management, and then back office is the accounting. This gives you a graphic that shows you what can be very difficult. And of course, the most difficult is POS. I always call a POS change open heart surgery, because that's exactly what it is, except your business can't afford to stop. It's got to keep on running. And so there's some challenges inherently built out with this right here. But Alex, this is your area of expertise. Walk us through how we should do a rollout once we've selected our entire system.
Yeah, absolutely. So, depending on the product and the type of product, this goes back to the beginning, goes back to the basics, which is understanding the foundation. You have to make sure that you have a strong foundation. You're building a pyramid here, and you have a lot of things that you want to put on it. So, understanding that your hardware, the network, the cabling, the physical equipment, and your software, the point of sale and the ERP and the services, being, in this case, I mentioned internet connections, making sure you have a strong foundation is key, not just to rolling out, but really maintaining any tech stack at this point. As we move on from here, we take a phased approach to most things. We're going to build the system to include expanded capabilities, back office functionality, the HRIS, which is Human Resource Information Systems. You'll see these referred to as HCM or Human Capital Management at times. HR Master, payroll, scheduling, taxes and benefits. We're talking about onboarding. We're talking about learning management systems, accounting packages, marketing technology, including mobile apps, loyalty and email marketing, guest satisfaction and survey, and collecting the customer feedback and closing that loop, as well as understanding internal communications, whether it's through intranet, through messaging, or checklisting. And finally, getting into the sort of top of the pyramid items, which are your analytics, your data warehousing. It's the feedback loop here. It's your data analytics systems and dashboarding. And sometimes it's food safety technology and alerting, project management and planning. But the idea here is to have a strong foundation that you can build upon and have it be flexible enough to change out the endpoints. We didn't talk a lot, and Fred, if you don't mind, I'd like to just go back real quick to the RFP slide. There's two pieces in here that I just think we need to highlight when we're talking about rollouts and pieces and training, which are key. The first is that during the process, one of the criteria that you need to ensure you talk about is rollout and training. And some of the selection criteria need to be around the ease of doing that. We talked about 8 to 40 systems in the average organization today that managers are interacting with. If these systems aren't simple to use, and if they're not simple to support by a smaller and smaller IT support team, that's a criteria that we have to take into account. And so when you're building that rollout plan, I bring that up with regards to your requirements. Also, I think it's important to talk about closing the loop and understanding that, although you might make a choice for a system today, these are relationships. So understanding that there's a vendor closeout process for these processes, to understand not just why the winner won, but also understand why the runner-up didn't win in this situation. Because as these vendors are working with us as an industry, I find it to be very helpful when they get the feedback they need to improve their products. I'd love to run RFPs where there's 5 or 6 different brands that all can meet the needs of the company, and it turns out that it's just a much easier puzzle piece to fit in that way. Okay, that's what I've got, Fred. Thank you.
So essentially, we set up the beginning of this webinar by talking about just the turbulent changes in the industry and how fast things are moving along, and the importance to understand the environment that we're all trying to operate in competitively. And technology is designed to help you with things you already do well. It cannot replace bad food and bad service, but it can help you do a better job of managing the day in the life of a manager. And then, David, why don't you just comment on the ideal state?
Just on the ideal state, I mean, as everyone looks to continue to find needs for innovation, it really is about consolidation. And that consolidation, will allow for you to reduce the tech stack, the spend, the complexity, in addition to the frustration of your managers. I encourage you, if you are on IT, I encourage you to spend a few days in a restaurant. Review the day in the life of a manager. We all see it on Undercover Boss. We see the difficulties that managers face on what somebody from the ivory tower is asking them to do, and then realizing the day-to-day and how difficult it is for them to operate. I really think that it would be eye-opening to spend several days in a restaurant to find out, what these disparate systems are doing in the day in the life of a manager.
That's great. And obviously with Clarify, you're trying to take a bunch of disparate systems and put into a logical workflow so it's easier to manage all these different activities. So that's good. And then Alex, thank you for explaining the RFP process to us, as well as you did, so people get to understand the importance of it. So if anyone has any questions, we're happy to field them, though we've been answering them as they've come up. And I'll just give you a second to add anything in there. And if you need to reach out to any one of us, we are available to answer questions beyond this as it comes up. And I want to make sure that I take the time to thank all our panelists today for participating in this. And we will have copies of this sent to you probably by next week. And we have all our other webinars up on the web available for your use. So David and Alex, thank you very much.
Thank you, Fred.
My pleasure, Fred. Thank you.
All right.